I had been working on this project for months, and tonight, it finally felt like I was on the edge of something huge. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I typed in the last lines of code, making small adjustments to the holographic interface in front of me. The room was dim, lit only by the glowing screens that were spread all around. I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement as I watched the blueprints for my device take shape. This wasn't just a normal project. It was a breakthrough. A device that could allow humans and aliens to communicate like never before. Something that could change the world. I glanced at the clock. It was already well past midnight. But I didn't care. I had spent countless hours researching, designing, and testing. Each failure had brought me one step closer to success, and now it was almost within my grasp. My alien roommate, Zara, had always been an unpredictable presence in the apartment. She wasn't like anyone I had ever known. Her species had a unique way of seeing the world, and her understanding of technology was beyond anything Earth had developed. She often seemed more like a visitor from the future than someone living in a small apartment with me in the middle of a crowded city. Zara wasn't the type to ask a lot of questions about my work, and I respected that. She had her own projects to work on, and I had mine. But every now and then, her curiosity would get the better of her. It was one of those nights. The soft click of the door opening made me pause for a moment, but I didn't turn around at first. Zara had a quiet way of entering rooms, even though she didn't have to. The faint glow from my holographic screens illuminated her features as she stepped into the room. Zara's skin was a pale blue-gray, and her large, almond-shaped eyes always seemed to be observing everything at once. She wore a loose, flowing garment that shimmered faintly in the low light, and her long, silvery hair hung loosely down her back. Despite her alien appearance, there was something warm and comforting about her presence. But tonight, there was something different in her eyes. "What are you working on?" she asked, her voice smooth but filled with curiosity. I hesitated for a moment, trying to decide how much to tell her. It wasn't that I didn't trust Zara. It was just that this project was personal. I had kept it to myself for so long, hoping to surprise the world once it was finished. But then again, Zara had helped me in ways I couldn't even describe, so maybe it wouldn't hurt to let her in on it a little. This. I gestured toward the hologram in front of me. It's a communication device. It could allow humans and aliens to exchange thoughts, ideas, feelings, without the need for language. A universal translator, but much more advanced. Zara stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied the projections floating in the air. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand every detail. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she processed the information. The thing with Zara was that she wasn't just any alien. She had lived among humans for years, studying our culture, our technology, and even our emotions. But she also had a deep understanding of her own people's technology, which was far more advanced than anything we had on Earth. In a way, she was a bridge between our worlds, someone who could understand both sides of the equation. "Your idea is fascinating," she said slowly, her voice thoughtful. "But how do you plan to make it work? I've seen human technology try to connect minds before, but it's always been limited. There's always a barrier." I turned to face her fully now, leaning against my desk. I had known she'd ask questions like this, and to be honest, it felt good to finally explain it to someone. "That's what I've been working on," I said, my voice filled with determination. "The barrier is the way information is processed. Right now, humans and aliens are too different, but what if we could find a common thread? Something that both species could understand, something that goes beyond words." Zara didn't say anything for a long moment. She just stared at the holograms, her expression unreadable. I couldn't tell if she was skeptical or impressed, and honestly, it made me feel a little nervous. Zara had seen and experienced things that no human could even imagine. So if anyone was capable of seeing the true potential of my project, it would be her. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and almost hesitant. "You believe this will work?" I nodded without hesitation. I have to. If it does, it could change everything. No more misunderstandings. No more conflict because of miscommunication. Imagine. Imagine a world where we could truly understand each other, where language and culture wouldn't get in the way. It would be a revolution, Zora. She was silent again, her eyes flicking back and forth, as if processing the weight of what I was saying. I could tell she was deep in thought, considering everything I had told her. But then she did something unexpected. She stepped closer to one of the screens and reached out, her long fingers hovering just above the holographic display. "What are you doing?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. I was about to tell her to stop when she looked over at me, her gaze intense. "I want to see more," she said simply, and her fingers brushed the surface of the projection. My heart raced as I watched her touch the hologram. I had worked so hard on this project, and it wasn't ready for anyone to interact with it yet. There were still so many bugs, and the interface was delicate. But something in Zora's demeanor made me pause. She wasn't just curious. She seemed to understand the potential of it better than anyone I had ever met. The screen flickered slightly under her touch, and for a brief second, the entire room seemed to hum with energy. I froze, watching her carefully. She didn't pull back. Instead, she seemed to focus more intently. Her eyes were wide with interest, and I could almost see her mind racing as she processed the data. "This is," Zora whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is more than I expected. It's like the device is alive in a way, responding to me." I quickly pulled my chair closer and began typing furiously, trying to regain control of the program before anything went wrong. "Don't mess with it. It's not ready." Zora pulled her hand back, but there was a spark in her eyes. "Sorry," she said, her tone amused, "but you've built something incredible here. I've never seen anything like it." I let out a sigh of relief, but my heart was still pounding in my chest. "I know. That's why it has to be perfect. I've got one shot at this, and I can't afford to mess it up." Zora's expression softened, and she stepped back, giving me some space. "I understand. But don't be afraid to let someone else in. I might be able to help. I've worked with technologies far beyond what you've got here." Her words lingered in the air, and I felt a strange mix of pride and uncertainty. Could I really trust her with this? This was my dream, my creation. But I couldn't deny that Zora had insights that no one else had, and if I wanted to make this work, I might need her help. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in my mind. Zora nodded and gave me a knowing smile. "I'll be around, whenever you're ready." As she left the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this project was about to change everything, maybe even my relationship with Zora. But one thing was certain. The discovery had just begun. After Zora left my room that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I had expected her to be curious about my project, but her response was different from what I anticipated. It wasn't just casual interest, it was genuine intrigue. She had spent the last few days quietly observing me, her eyes always lingering on the holographic screens I worked with. Each time I looked over at her, she seemed to be waiting for something. An answer, maybe, or an invitation to be part of it all. The next day, I woke up to find Zora sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through a datapad. Her dark blue eyes flickered up as I entered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like excitement in them. She set the datapad down and leaned forward, a playful smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You've been working a lot lately," she said. "Is it getting close to being finished?" I was surprised by the question. I hadn't really expected Zora to keep up with my project, especially not to the point where she'd remember to ask about it in the morning. But then again, her curiosity had always been sharper than most people's. Even though she kept a lot of her thoughts to herself, she seemed to be always analyzing everything around her, trying to understand it, even if she didn't always show it. "I'm getting there," I replied, trying to sound casual. "It's taking longer than I thought. There are a lot of details to work out, and I'm still trying to perfect the interface." It's delicate. Zara's smile faded a little, but the curiosity was still there, burning brightly in her eyes. It sounds important, more than just a simple project. I couldn't help but pause at her words. I had spent months working on it, but hearing her say it like that made it feel even bigger than it already was. It was a simple statement, but it carried so much weight. It made me wonder if Zara understood more about it than I had realized. Maybe she saw the potential of what I was trying to do better than I could, maybe even better than I had ever allowed myself to believe. "Yeah," I said, my voice softer now. "It is important. It could change everything, you know. If it works, humans and aliens could finally communicate in ways we've never been able to before. No language barriers, no misunderstandings, just understanding." Zara leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing, as if processing my words. "That's a big idea," she said, her voice thoughtful. "But you know as well as I do that getting both sides to understand each other isn't always as simple as just technology. People, no, beings, don't just need words to understand each other. They need to trust." Her words struck a chord. She was right. The technology was just one part of it. The real challenge would be getting both humans and aliens to trust it, to use it, and to let go of their doubts. Communication wasn't just about exchanging information. It was about building bridges between worlds, and trust was the foundation of that bridge. I had been so focused on the technology itself that I hadn't really thought much about the deeper implications of what it would mean. It wasn't just about fixing a problem. It was about changing the way we saw each other, and that was something far more complicated. Trust wasn't something you could program or force. It was something you had to earn, and that was something I hadn't even begun to figure out. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But if I can make this work, maybe it'll be easier. Maybe it'll be the first step." Zara gave a small, understanding nod, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She wasn't just thinking about the project now. She was thinking about everything that came with it. The risks, the rewards, the consequences. I could see it in her face, and I realized that she wasn't just interested in the technology anymore. She was interested in what it meant. Over the next few days, Zara continued to hover around my workspace. She never asked to see the project directly again, but I could feel her curiosity growing. Every time she walked by, she would pause and study the holograms I was working on. Sometimes, she would ask small questions about how it worked, what the next steps were, or if I needed help with anything. She was careful not to cross any boundaries, but there was an undeniable pull to everything I was doing. At first, I didn't mind. It was nice to have someone around who cared about what I was doing, who could understand the importance of it, even if they didn't completely grasp the technical side of things. But as time went on, Zora's questions became more pointed. She wasn't just asking to understand. She was asking to be involved. One evening, as I was running a diagnostic on the project's coding, Zara came into the room again. I didn't look up immediately, assuming she was just passing through. But when I heard her voice, I knew this time was different. "Can I help you with it?" she asked, her tone calm but serious. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Her question hung in the air for a moment, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of uncertainty. The project was so personal to me, so fragile in its early stages. I wasn't sure if I was ready to let anyone else into it, even Zara, who I trusted more than anyone else. But at the same time, her insight, her perspective, she might be the one thing I needed to make this work. "I don't know." I trailed off, unsure of what to say. "It's complicated. It's not just about the technology. It's about the connection between humans and aliens. If I mess this up, it could set everything back by years." Zara didn't look offended or hurt. Instead, she gave a small, knowing smile. "I get it. But you're not alone in this. You don't have to do everything by yourself. Maybe I can help, even if it's just with a different point of view." I looked at her for a long time, my mind racing with thoughts and doubts. Zara wasn't just any alien. She had lived with for years studying us, learning how we think and feel. She understood both sides of the equation better than anyone else. If anyone could help me get past the obstacles in this project, it would be her. Finally, I sighed, realizing that keeping her out of it wasn't going to help me. If I really wanted this project to succeed, I had to let go of some of my control. I had to trust her. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "What do you think? Where should I start?" Zara's eyes lit up at my response. She wasted no time, stepping closer to the holographic interface and studying the screen with an intensity I hadn't seen before. It was like a switch had been flipped. Her focus was sharp, and I could tell she wasn't just being helpful out of kindness. She was deeply invested in the project now. "I think," she said slowly, "the connection you're trying to build between minds isn't just about the technology. It's about the way we think. You're focusing a lot on the technical side, but what about the emotional side? How do we feel each other's thoughts, not just understand them?" Her question struck me like a bolt of lightning. It was so simple, yet I hadn't considered it. I had been so focused on making the technology work that I hadn't thought about the emotions that would be involved. Emotions weren't just a human thing. Aliens had them too. The ability to connect on an emotional level, to share those feelings, could make the communication so much more meaningful. "I never thought of that," I admitted. "But you're right. It's not just about information. It's about understanding each other, feeling each other." Zara nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Exactly." For the first time in a long while, I felt like the project had truly taken shape. It wasn't just a technical challenge anymore. It was a chance to bridge the gap between two species. It was about trust, emotion, and understanding. And now, with Zora's help, it felt like we might actually be able to make it work. As she continued to share her ideas, I realized that Zara wasn't just a roommate anymore. She was becoming my partner in this project. And together, we might just change everything. Things between Zara and me had changed in the days following our conversation about the project. What had started as a simple curiosity from her had grown into a deeper involvement. She wasn't just sitting by and asking questions anymore. She was part of the process, helping me think through the problem in ways I hadn't even considered. But as much as I appreciated her help, there was a growing sense of unease building inside me. The project was advancing faster than I had expected, and with that came a rising pressure. I had always known that it wasn't just a tech challenge. It was about trust. But the more Zara helped, the more I realized that she wasn't just helping with the project. She was becoming part of the larger puzzle, and that created a tension I couldn't ignore. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. I did. In fact, I trusted her more than I had trusted anyone in a long time. But the closer we got to the heart of the project, the more I felt the weight of its potential. If this worked, it could change everything. It could change the way humans and aliens saw each other, how we communicated, how we interacted. But what if it didn't work? What if, despite all of our efforts, the device failed? What if it caused something worse, something irreversible? Zara seemed completely confident, as if there was no doubt in her mind that we were on the right track. But I wasn't sure. The pressure was building, and every time I ran a test or made a new adjustment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking a fine line. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. It wasn't just the fear of failure that made me nervous. It was something deeper. Zara had a way of looking at the project with an intensity that was almost unsettling. She wasn't just helping me to build something. She was deeply invested in it. And I wasn't sure where her interest ended and where something more personal began. Every time she leaned over my shoulder to examine the data or reached out to adjust a setting, there was a kind of electricity between us. It was subtle but undeniable. She wasn't just a colleague anymore. She wasn't just my roommate. She was something more, something that I didn't know how to define. That afternoon, as we sat at the table, going over the latest test results, the tension between us finally reached a boiling point. Zara had been unusually quiet for the past hour, her eyes flicking over the holographic display as I worked through the final stages of the device's interface. The data was promising, but it wasn't perfect. I could feel the frustration building as I tried to solve the last few glitches. Every time I thought I was close to a breakthrough, something went wrong. The interface would freeze, or the connection would drop, or the results wouldn't sync up as they should. I ran my hand through my hair, letting out a frustrated sigh. "It's not working," I muttered under my breath, the weight of the failure hanging in the air. Zora glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "It will work," she said softly. "You're close. You just need to push through." I shook my head, trying to fight back the creeping doubt. "I don't know. Every time we test it, it's like it's missing something. I feel like we're missing the key. It's so close, but just not enough." Zara reached across the table and gently touched my hand, a gesture that was so small, but it felt like a spark. I looked up, surprised by her sudden closeness. Her eyes were calm, focused, but there was something deeper in them, something that seemed to reflect my own growing anxiety. "You're overthinking it," she said. "You're so focused on making it perfect that you're losing sight of why you're doing this in the first place." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much pressure I had been putting on myself to make the project flawless. It wasn't just about building something to connect people. It was about proving that I could do it. It was about showing the world, and maybe even myself, that I could make something that mattered. But I had gotten so lost in the details that I had forgotten why I started in the first place. I pulled my hand back, rubbing my forehead in frustration. I know, I said. But what if it's not enough? What if it's just too much? What if we're not ready for this?" Zora was silent for a moment, as if carefully considering her response. When she spoke again, her voice was low, almost tender. "You're afraid of failure. I can see it." I looked at her, surprised by her words. It wasn't something I had openly admitted, even to myself. But Zara had a way of seeing through me. "I'm not afraid of failing," I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "I'm afraid of what happens if we succeed, and it's not what we expect. What if we open a door, and we can't close it?" Zara's eyes softened, and she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "I understand," she said quietly, "but fear of what could happen isn't enough to stop us from trying. If we don't take the risk, we'll never know what we're truly capable of." I stared at her, a mix of admiration and doubt swirling in my mind. Zara was confident, sure, but there was a calm in her that I didn't have. She wasn't afraid of the unknown. She embraced it, and that kind of courage was something I admired. But could I follow her lead? Could I let go of my fear and trust that we were doing the right thing? "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, the weight of my words heavier than I expected. "I've put everything into this project. And now, with you involved, I don't know what happens if it goes wrong." Zara stood up, walking over to where I was sitting. Her presence was steady, grounding, and for a moment, it felt like she was the calm in the storm that was raging inside me. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "I'm here. I trust you, and I trust this project. No matter what happens, we're in this together." Her words hung in the air, settling around me like a warm blanket. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if the device would work, or if it would change the world. I didn't know if it would bring us closer to understanding each other, or if it would open up a flood of unintended consequences. But I did know one thing. I couldn't do it alone. I let out a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief that I hadn't expected. Zara's words had unlocked something inside me, something I didn't even realize I needed to hear. Maybe I didn't have all the answers, and maybe I didn't know what would happen next. But as long as we were in it together, I could face whatever came our way. I looked up at her, a small, grateful smile spreading across my face. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in days. "Let's do this. Let's finish it." Zara smiled back, her expression softening. That's the spirit. We worked late into the night, side by side, adjusting the settings and rerunning the tests. The room was filled with the soft hum of the holograms and the steady tapping of our fingers on the console. The tension was still there, hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. But now, instead of feeling like I was carrying the weight of the world alone, I felt lighter, like a burden had been shared. Zara's calm confidence had given me the push I needed to move forward. I didn't know what would happen the next time we tested the device, but I was ready to face it with Zara by my side. Whatever came, we would handle it together. The tension that had been growing between Zara and me had settled into something deeper, something more uncertain. We were getting closer to the moment when everything would change, and yet, every step forward brought new doubts. Despite the progress we had made with the project, something felt off, like we were on the edge of a discovery that could either solve everything or tear it apart. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something we were both missing, some truth that we hadn't uncovered yet. The days seemed to blur together. We worked tirelessly, testing and reworking the device, tweaking the algorithms and adjusting the interfaces. It was exhausting, both mentally and physically. But through it all, Zara remained steady, unwavering in her belief that we were on the right path. She seemed to know exactly what to do, and every time I felt myself slipping into doubt, her presence steadied me. Still, despite her calm confidence, I could tell something had changed in her too. She had grown quieter, more reflective. She didn't ask as many questions anymore. Instead, she would watch me work, her eyes following every movement, as if she were trying to understand something deeper than the project itself. I had noticed that she often stared at the device, her expression intense, as though it were speaking to her in ways I couldn't understand. At first, I thought it was just her usual curiosity, but the longer it went on, the more I realized that there was something else, something she wasn't telling me. One evening, as we sat in the dim glow of the holographic screens, Zara suddenly turned to me. Her face was serious, more focused than I had ever seen her. It was like the weight of the world was pressing down on her. And for a moment, I didn't know whether to be concerned or to ask what was going on. "Listen," she said, her voice low. "I need to tell you something." I looked up from the console, surprised by the sudden shift in her tone. "What is it?" Zara hesitated, her fingers lightly tapping against the edge of the table. Her gaze darted toward the project, then back to me. "There's more to this project than you think," she said slowly. "It's not just about communication between humans and aliens. That's part of it, yes, but there's a bigger reason why this technology exists." I frowned, not sure if I was hearing her right. "What do you mean? You've always known what this was about." "It's about breaking the language barrier, right?" Zara shook her head, her expression becoming more serious with every passing second. "No, it's not just about that. It's about opening something that's been closed off for a long time, something that we've both been blind to." I leaned forward, my curiosity piqued. "What are you talking about?" For a long moment, Zara didn't say anything. She stared at the device, almost as if she were searching for the right words. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The technology you've created, it's not just a tool for communication. It's a doorway, a way to connect minds, not just between species, but between different dimensions of reality." I blinked, not sure if I had heard her correctly. "What do you mean, different dimensions of reality?" Zara took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to explain something that had been buried for a long time. "When I first came to Earth, I knew that humans and aliens had a long way to go in terms of understanding each other. But there's something deeper at play here, something that goes beyond physical boundaries. This technology you've been building, it's more than just a way to communicate with each other. It's a way to unlock things that have been hidden for centuries. Ancient knowledge, forgotten histories, the ability to access hidden dimensions, alternate versions of reality, timelines that have been lost." I stared at her in disbelief, trying to process her words. Alternate versions of reality, timelines. Zara nodded slowly. Yes, this technology doesn't just transmit thoughts or ideas. It connects consciousness on a level that transcends time and space. You're not just communicating with aliens or other humans. You're tapping into something much more powerful, something that's been kept hidden from both of us. I didn't know what to think. I felt a mix of awe and fear. I had always known that the project was bigger than I could understand. But this was something completely different. I had no idea what Zara was trying to say, but it felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. So, you're saying that this technology is a gateway? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. A way to open up other realities. Zara's eyes were dark, almost troubled. Yes, but it's not something to take lightly. The more we test it, the more we push its boundaries, the more we risk unleashing something we might not be able to control. There are forces out there, forces that we don't fully understand. If we open the wrong door, we might bring something into this world that we can't send back. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had been so focused on the potential for communication, for breaking down barriers between species, that I hadn't thought about what else could be hiding behind those barriers. What if we were opening a door to something we weren't ready for? What if we were pulling something into our world that could destroy everything we had worked for? I took a step back, feeling a sudden weight in my chest. So what do we do now? I asked, my voice shaky. How do we know we're not making a mistake? Zara didn't answer right away. She stared at the project, her eyes distant. I don't know, she said quietly. But I do know that we can't turn back now. The device is almost complete. We've come too far to stop. But we need to be careful. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. A silence fell between us, heavy with the weight of what had just been revealed. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't comprehend, a precipice that could lead to either salvation or destruction. There was so much at stake now, and yet I didn't know what to do with this new information. After a long pause, I finally spoke, my voice uncertain. Do you really think this is possible? That we're tapping into something bigger than us? Zara met my gaze, her eyes steady and full of a quiet resolve. I don't know, but I think we have no choice but to find out. This is what we've been building toward, whether we like it or not. We're on the verge of something monumental. I didn't know if I was ready for what we were about to do. But looking at Zara, I realized that we had already crossed a line. There was no going back now. The device was almost complete, and whatever happened next, we would face it together. The days after Zara's revelation were some of the most intense I'd ever experienced. The weight of what we had uncovered hung over me, and I couldn't stop thinking about the potential dangers. I had always believed in the power of technology to connect people, to break barriers and build understanding. But now, everything felt different. It wasn't just a project anymore. It wasn't just about communication. It was about the very fabric of reality itself, and we had no idea what we were really dealing with. Zara, too, seemed to have changed. She was more withdrawn, her focus sharper than ever. I could see her mind racing, constantly running calculations and scenarios. It was clear that she had known more than she had let on. But even with her knowledge, I could tell that she wasn't entirely sure what was going to happen. There was a certain hesitation in her eyes, a quiet fear that she didn't know how to hide. We worked long hours, running tests and refining the device. Every time we thought we were close to a breakthrough, something would go wrong. The results were unpredictable, like we were tapping into something that couldn't be fully understood or controlled. It was as though the project was evolving on its own, shifting in ways we couldn't anticipate. But despite all the setbacks, there was something about it that kept drawing us back. Something that whispered that we were on the verge of something bigger than either of us had imagined. One night, after another failed test, I found myself sitting at the table, staring at the holographic display in front of me. The numbers and data were a blur, and for a moment, I felt like giving up. Maybe we had been too ambitious. Maybe we weren't ready for what we had started. My hands rested on the table, and I closed my eyes, trying to push away the overwhelming sense of doubt that was clouding my mind. "Hey," Zara's voice broke through the silence, soft but steady. "You okay?" I opened my eyes and looked up at her. She was standing beside me, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the holograms. There was concern in her eyes, but there was also something else, a quiet determination that reminded me of why we had started this project in the first place. "I don't know," I said honestly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if we're doing the right thing. What if this all goes wrong? What if we can't control it?" Zora placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding me. "We can't predict everything," she said gently. "But we're in this together, and we've come too far to back out now." I nodded, appreciating her words, but the weight of uncertainty still pressed heavily on me. Just then, the door to the lab opened, and a familiar voice cut through the air. "You two look like you've been at this for hours," Kyan said, stepping into the room. He was one of my closest friends, a fellow engineer who had been helping with the technical side of the project. I hadn't seen him in days, and the sudden appearance of his calm, familiar presence was a welcome relief. "We have," I said with a tired smile, "but it's not working. We're missing something." Kyan raised an eyebrow and walked over to the table, glancing at the holographic display. "It's not about what's missing," he said, his voice low but confident. "It's about what's already here." I looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Kyan motioned toward the display, his finger tracing through the data. "You're trying to force the device to do something it wasn't designed for. You're focusing on the wrong things." Zara and I exchanged a glance. We had been so focused on the device's technical problems that we hadn't considered what Kyan was suggesting. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice filled with skepticism. Kyan sat down beside me, his eyes studying the data with an intensity that I hadn't seen before. "The project isn't just about creating a tool for communication. You've been building something that taps into the fundamental nature of reality. What you're seeing as a flaw isn't a flaw at all. It's a feature." I blinked, trying to wrap my mind around what he was saying. "A feature. But it's not working the way it's supposed to. We're still not getting the results we want." "That's because you've been looking at it the wrong way," Kyan continued, his voice steady and calm. "You're thinking in terms of problem solving. But this device isn't meant to be solved. It's meant to be experienced." I stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. It was like he was speaking a different language, one that I hadn't learned yet. But there was something in the way he spoke that made me want to listen. He had always been one of the brightest minds I knew, and I had learned to trust his instincts. Zara seemed to understand where Kyan was going. She nodded slowly. "You mean, it's not about making it perfect. It's about letting it show us what it can do." Kyan smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Exactly. You've been so focused on getting it right that you've ignored the possibility that it might have its own path, its own way of revealing itself." I took a deep breath, trying to digest everything Kyan had just said. He was right, in a way. We had been so consumed with fixing every little detail, with making everything align perfectly, that we had forgotten to let the device breathe, to let it show us what it could become. It was then that I realized something. We weren't in control of this project, not in the way I had thought. We were just the ones who had opened the door. What lay beyond that door was something we had no way of predicting. And maybe that was okay. "We're doing it wrong," I said quietly, more to myself than to anyone else. "We've been trying to shape this thing into what we want it to be instead of letting it be what it's supposed to be." Zara's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on my arm. "It's not too late to change our approach," she said, her voice steady. "We just need to trust it." I looked at Kyan, then at Zara. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. We didn't have to know everything. We didn't have to control every outcome. All we had to do was trust the process. Kyan's eyes twinkled with quiet amusement, as if he knew something we didn't. "Well, I think we're about to learn a whole lot more than we ever expected." With a newfound sense of resolve, we worked together through the night, adjusting the device not with the intent to perfect it, but to let it show us what it was capable of. It was a different approach, one that felt right, but also incredibly daunting. As we ran the tests again, this time without the pressure of getting everything just right, the results started to shift. The device hummed in a way it hadn't before, as if it were waking up. A new kind of energy filled the room, and the data that appeared on the screen was unlike anything we had seen so far.